KPBS On Demand is supported by the San Diego County Toyota dealers, presenting a new 2025 Corolla. With classic styling, available 10.5-inch touchscreen display, Toyota Safety Sense 3.0, and more. See your Toyota dealer for all Corolla options. The San Diego County Toyota dealers. We make it easy.
Hey San Diego, I'm Andrew Bowen, in for Jade Hindman. From Seinfeld to Curb Your Enthusiasm to Borat, Larry Charles has been making us laugh for decades. A new memoir reflects on 40 years in comedy. This is KPBS Midday Edition, connecting our communities through conversation. Chances are you've laughed at the work of Larry Charles, whether it was a joke from the groundbreaking 90s sitcom Seinfeld, a scene from HBO's Curb Your Enthusiasm, or from directing films such as Borat and The Dictator. He has been an influential voice in American comedy for decades. Now, he's the author of a new memoir called Comedy Samurai, 40 Years of Blood, Guts, and Laughter. He'll also be a headliner at the inaugural KPBS San Diego Book Festival on Saturday, August 23rd. KPBS's Andrew Bracken spoke with Larry Charles last week about his book and career. Here's that conversation.
How did you discover comedy and decide what it seems like pretty early on that's what you wanted to do with your life?
Well, there's a couple of steps to it. First of all, my dad had been a failed comedian. He came out of World War II on the GI Bill, and instead of buying a house like a lot of people did and practical things, he went to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. He did stand-up. His stage name was Psycho, the Exotic Neurotic. And so when I was a young kid, my father was on, even though he was already out of show business, he was on all the time. And he was always doing shtick and doing jokes and being funny. And he was hilarious. And so I was his audience, and that was my first real kind of exposure to comedy, was just hanging out with him. And I gravitated to the usual comedy that was on TV at the time, the Three Stooges, Abbott and Costello, things like that. And I really felt a kind of kinship. And he had a friend who was a writer who wrote some material for him back in the late 40s, who went on to write for Get Smart and The Tonight Show. And I was fascinated by that. And I would look for his name in the credits. And I thought, wow, I wonder how you do that. How do you get into that, And then he would take me, he had friends from drama school who weren't actors anymore, but they worked in show business. And for instance, he would take me to the Ed Sullivan rehearsals because his friend was the production manager. And I got to see how TV shows are put together when I was a real little kid, and it really, all these things had an impact on me. And then later on in high school, I thought about comedy. I loved comedy, but I met a friend in high school who was a comedian. He was a comedian working professionally in high school. And he and I became very close. And he was kind of like my Fagin, and kind of led me into stand-up comedy. And we wound up being a team, and we traveled the country. And so I got a taste of it that way. So it seemed almost like, how the sons of football coaches become football coaches. Right. I was kind of bred to be in comedy,
Yeah. So, you grew up in Brooklyn, you grew up in New York around all that comedy that you mentioned there, but you pretty early on went out to Los Angeles, did chase your Hollywood dream. You sold your first joke to former Tonight Show host Jay Leno. Can you tell us that story?
Yeah, I didn't know how to break into show business. I really didn't. And but I knew I had to come out to California. It seemed like that's where the action was. And what I used to do, I didn't have a typewriter. I used to handwrite jokes on a legal pad. And I knew that I had read that Woody Allen sold jokes to comedians. And I thought, oh, well, maybe I could do that. So I wrote jokes on a legal pad, and then I would go to the Comedy Store. And at that time at the Comedy Store, it was a very golden era at the Comedy Store. You had, Robin Williams was doing stuff then. Richard Pryor was doing stuff then. And the two biggest comedians at the Comedy Store at that time were Jay Leno and David Letterman, ironically enough. And so I would go to the Comedy Store, and I would literally stand in front of the Comedy Store, and when I would see a comedian that I recognized, I'd walk up to them and say, "Hey, you wanna buy a joke?" And the comedians were very receptive. They always needed material, and Jay Leno looked at my material, looked at a joke, liked that joke, said, "I'll try it out on stage." It was he bought it on consignment. "I'll try it out on stage. If it gets a laugh, I'll give you $10." And it got a laugh, and I got
Do you
$10.
remember the
And I
joke?
started the joke was something about there was a commercial at the time about Delta Airlines, the airline run by professionals. What did they have on the other airlines? Amateurs? It was something along those lines. It wasn't the strongest joke, but it was very much in his wheelhouse. And so I started writing jokes for comedians, and got kind of a reputation. And one of those comedians got cast on this TV show Fridays, and he recommended me to submit my material.
Yeah, and Fridays, that was a pretty influential show, I'd say. I think it was something of a, I mean, maybe you can break it down, but something of initially kind of like a competitor to Saturday Night Live in the late 70s, right? Can you tell us a little bit more about that experience?
Well, I think ABC wanted to have a competitor to Saturday Night Live, and but we, the writers, especially, we were kind of like radical young guys, and we really did not want the show to resemble Saturday Night Live in any way. We didn't want people to accuse us of being a ripoff of Saturday Night Live. We wanted our own identity. So, we immediately were like coming up with very extreme, radical ideas. And the producer said to us, "Why don't you guys come up with the name for the show?" In fact, and we all went back and we wrote these really crazy names for the show, even like not even like words sometimes, just symbols like Prince. And we came in the next day, and there was the binders and the jackets and the stationery, and it all said Fridays on it already. And it was like, wow, they made the decision without even consulting us. And now it's how are you going to ever escape the shadow of Saturday Night Live with that name? And so it kind of like even emboldened us even more to try to find a radical separation from Saturday Night Live as much as possible. And for quite a while we were on, it was probably Saturday Night Live's weaker seasons. And so we were able to really get an audience, and we were doing things that they weren't doing. And it was the Los Angeles vibe. And we were able to kind of establish an identity for a while, but it didn't last too long.
But, part of your experience on Fridays is it introduced you to Larry David, who you later worked with on Seinfeld, Curb Your Enthusiasm. On those Seinfeld years, of which I could probably recite most of the series at this point, did you know that you were working on something that would become, so iconic, so quoted, so referenced, decades later?
Well, let me first of all add that Michael Richards was also on Fridays, so that's where I met him as well. No, not at all. Not in the least did we have any idea that you and I would be sitting here today still talking about the show. We were in a desperate, kind of state of mind at all times. Larry used to beg the production company and the network to cancel the show in those first early seasons because it was so much work, and coming up with stories was so hard. And there was no Seinfeld. We didn't know what a Seinfeld was at that point. We were still figuring out what the formula was. We were trying to crack the code. So we didn't know anything about what is this show? What is it going to be? We just made a decision because we thought the show's going to get canceled, and it's never going to survive. Let's just do what we think is funny. Let's just make the funniest show that we can, a show that we find funny. And inadvertently, by doing that, we made Seinfeld.
One of the main takeaways from this book that I took from it is, comedy is not all about laughs here. Far from it. It comes across even in the book's title, Comedy Samurai, 40 Years of Blood, Guts, and Laughter. What is it about comedy that makes it so serious for you? And, even that order of there's like, it starts with blood, guts. Why is laughter last there?
Well, comedy is a very yeah, it's maybe a cliche, but comedy is a serious business. I mean, there's a lot of people are drawn to comedy because of dysfunction on some level. They usually don't find that many happy people going into comedy. You find a lot of happy people who love comedy, but you don't find a lot of happy people who make comedy because it's a very desperate sort of job. There's a lot of anger amongst comedy people. There's a lot of fear amongst comedy people, a lot of neurosis and anxiety amongst comedy people. And that's what fuels the comedy, ironically enough. So there is a price that you pay for coming up with funny stuff because nobody really knows what's funny. And that's a very scary thing. Mel Brooks once said, the scariest thing is looking at that blank page. And it is. And it never gets easier. You never think, oh, wow, I figured it out. I know how to be funny now. No, every day is a challenge, and you don't know what's going to be funny. You don't know why something is even funny. You have to trust your instincts, and your instincts could be wrong. It's a very, very, it's a battle. It's a battle within you to figure out what's funny and how to then execute it in a way that other people might find funny. So there is no real formula. People are constantly trying to quantify comedy. Oh, well, if you do this, it'll be funny. If you do that, it'll be funny. But there are no guarantees. And the greatest comedy is the comedy that surprises, that doesn't deliver what you expect, but what you need. A movie like Borat or a show like Seinfeld, people didn't realize they wanted that until they had it. And then they went, wow, where's this been all my life?
Yeah. You mentioned Borat there. I mean, that's an example of a few of your films that you've done with Sacha Baron Cohen specifically, where they're fictional stories, but they take place in the real world. Everyday people are in them. And I imagine, it gets pretty risky mixing that fiction with reality. How did you approach that as a storyteller, and what challenges did it bring compared to, some of your other work?
Well, the greatest challenge was creating this alternate reality in which Borat could enter and people would believe that he was real. And Sasha was so amazing. I mean, he would get up in the morning, and when he came out of his hotel room, he was Borat. And that was it for the whole day. And we would shoot quite often 16-hour days, and he had to be Borat all the time. He couldn't break character. It's not like regular acting. This is why I thought he deserved an Oscar, because it's not like regular acting when you're acting with other actors and you have takes if things don't go well and there's a crew around. We were very surreptitious. We had to be. And we had to create this alternate reality. So everybody played a role. I played a role in the movie, even though I wasn't on camera. I had to talk to the people that he was about to talk to and sort of get them in the state of mind of accepting that this person from Kazakhstan was going to come in and talk to them, and it was real. And you wove this sort of, this kind of alternate reality. It was almost like a trance that you put people into so that they would believe that what was happening around them was real. And that was the key. And they wouldn't realize that it wasn't real until we were gone. And then maybe they would snap out of it at that point. Or sometimes they didn't find out until like their kids saw the movie like 6 months later and said, hey, Dad, you're in this movie. So that was the key, I think, to the success of Borat, was creating this trance state so that people would not realize that they were, they were in the middle of a comedy movie.
One thing you do in this book, is you kind of pull back the curtain a little bit on this comedy world, warts and all. And it's really, a lot about the relationships between those who create it. What made you want to write about that?
Well, I felt like I had some unique experiences, and I thought that they spilled out from just simply anecdotes about making these things to the life lessons that I was learning along the way. This is a journey. There was a lot of emotion involved in it. There was a lot of conflict involved with it, and it kind of transcended comedy itself and became about life, my life specifically, but life in a way that I think other people can connect, whether they're doing comedy or not. The interaction between people, the personalities, the conflicts that sometimes get resolved and sometimes don't. All those things, I thought, that's real, and that's really the resonance of the book, is that it's about life more than it's even about comedy. And that's the blood and guts part.
Yeah, and on that, I mean, you do document a lot of painful moments in your journey, including your falling out with longtime collaborators like Larry David, like Sacha Baron Cohen. What was it like to relive some of the more difficult moments that you write about here?
It was painful, honestly. I mean, it would have been easier for me to just write a book of anecdotes, but I thought that's kind of like a very superficial book. It's not, again, like with Seinfeld, we wanted to make a show that we would watch, and in the same way, I wanted to write a book that I would read. And for me, it needed more substance. It needed truth, even harsh, unvarnished truth. And I thought, I can't sanitize these stories. I have to tell the truth to make the book worthwhile for me and then hopefully for an audience as well. And so facing those things and writing about them in a way that wasn't like pointing a finger, but taking some of the responsibility myself, that was the most challenging part of the writing of the book.
And what's been the reaction to the book so far, especially, that more harsh, unvarnished truth you were just talking about?
Well, I've had a very wide variety of reactions. Most people that I have talked to or I've bumped into or that have been exposed have loved the book for one reason or another. A lot of people just love, the showbiz anecdotes, but more people, I would say, really connected to the philosophy that I talk about and the ethics that I talk about and the life experiences that I talk about, the emotional part of the journey. And like I said, that really transcends the comedy and transcends the show business. So I have been very gratified by people picking up on that part of the book, that aspect of the book, which is woven in with everything. So it's all part of, it's part of the whole. It's not a separate thing. I can't tell the story of Borat or Curb or Seinfeld without interweaving the emotional journey that I was going through at the time. So I have found it very gratifying that people really picked up on that and have found that satisfying and fulfilling on a much higher level, I think, than just a book about show business.
The comedy world you write about in your book doesn't seem to be an easy one to survive to me. Why do you think you lasted so long when, many others didn't?
It's a good question. I mean, I don't really have a definitive answer. I know that I was resilient at times when others fell by the wayside. I knew that I could. Here it is. I learned how to fail. I had grown up with a lot of failure, and I wasn't afraid of failure. And I realized early on that comedy there was a lot of failure. Failure was part of the equation of success. You couldn't have success without failure, and you better learn how to deal with failure if you wanted to succeed. And so when I failed, which was often, and many of my role models in life, from Larry David to Bob Dylan, have failed publicly many, many times. But when I failed, I didn't quit. I kept going. I had a certain resilience. I was able to bounce back. It made me even double my efforts sometimes when I failed to make sure that my success would be indisputable the next time. So I think that's the kind of energy you have to put into this to succeed at it.
Much of your work is pretty pretty ubiquitous. I'm sure sometimes you might, turn on a TV and see an episode of Seinfeld playing or, Borat being on there somewhere. Are you able to appreciate your work, or do you more, focus on this blood, guts, this sort of journey you've had creating it instead?
Well, Bob Dylan said, "Don't look back," and I have kind of lived that philosophy myself. I never watch my stuff after I'm done with it. And but yes, I have stumbled here and there, switching the channel, and there's Borat or Bruno, or there's a episode of Seinfeld that I wrote, or an episode of Curb that I directed, and I might stop for a moment and laugh because I think it's still pretty funny, and my memories will come flooding in of that experience, and but that's the extent of it. I try not to be too tied up with the past, and that's what was so cathartic about writing the book was I got all those memories out. I really am somebody that's focused on the future to a large degree and the present, and so I don't really dwell on the past, but I have a good memory, and that was sort of the impetus of the book as well. I don't dwell too much. I know it's funny. I know people love it. People tell me all the time how much they love it, and I'm really, really happy when people tell me that. It makes me feel really great. But for myself, I don't give myself, and it sounds weird, almost perverse, I don't give myself the pleasure of watching my own stuff.
Larry Charles's book is called Comedy Samurai: 40 Years of Blood, Guts, and Laughter. He'll be a headliner at the inaugural KPBS San Diego Book Festival on Saturday, August 23rd. Larry Charles, thanks so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me, Andrew. It's great to meet you. Thanks.
And that's our show for today. I'm your host, Andrew Bowen, in for Jade Hindman. Thanks for listening to Midday Edition. Have a great day.
KPBS On Demand is supported by UC San Diego's Art Power, presenting Nathan Chester and the Old Souls Motown Revival on August 23rd at UC San Diego's Epstein Family Amphitheater. Tickets at artpower.ucsd.edu.